Most military shooters are just escapism from real life, offering things like big set pieces, glorified violence, and clearly drawn lines between hero and villain. Typically, all players do is just save the day with brute force and complete moral certainty. But Spec Ops: The Line, released in 2012 by Jaeger Development and published by 2Gate Games, is not that kind of game at all. If you look at trailers for the game, it pretends to be a traditional third-person military shooter, but once you play the game, it really does pull the rug out from under you. Instead of empowering you, it shows you the worst parts that war has to offer, dragging you through the psychological wreckage. This is a game that looks you dead in the eyes and asks,
"Do you feel like a hero yet?"
If this already sounds like a game that you'd be interested to play, please make sure you play the game first because it is genuinely a great game, and then you should totally come back to this video. At first glance, Spec Ops: The Line appears to be like any other shooter from this era, like Gears of War or Call of Duty. You take on the role of Captain Martin Walker, accompanied by two Delta Force operatives, Adams and Lugo, as they're sent into a sandstorm-ravaged Dubai. The city is partially buried in sand and is heavily giving the first level in LEGO Marvel Superheroes. Their mission is to locate Colonel John Conrad and the 33rd Battalion, a unit that had gone dark after attempting to evacuate civilians during the massive sandstorm. Dubai itself is the first sign that this is just no ordinary battlefield, since it's turned into a complete graveyard of luxury and wealth, creating a haunting backdrop for the horrors to come later in the story. But as the mission unfolds, what initially seems like a standard military operation slowly morphs into something far darker. Things like communications become way more unreliable, the enemies begin to behave unpredictably, and the morality of the team's actions become very questionable at best. Every decision you make as Walker pulls you deeper into the chaos, and by the time the story reaches its climax, you're forced to confront the single damning truth. You never really were here to save anyone. They've been dead since the start. So the real question is, what makes Spec Ops: The Line so different from other shooters? Why does it still come up in discussions about narrative design and ethical storytelling more than a decade after release? I would say there are three core elements that define its goatedness. Its moral deconstruction of the shooter genre, its commitment to psychological storytelling and player manipulation, and most importantly, portraying violence as something that isn't fun. TLDR, violence is bad, I guess. The military shooter genre, especially in the late 2000s and early 2010s, was overly saturated by titles that put players in the boots of righteous heroes. Modern Warfare, Battlefield, and Medal of Honor frame world conflicts in black and white, often conflating military intervention with heroism, though Spec Ops: The Line completely flipped this narrative. The game begins with the assumption that Walker is a protagonist on some noble mission, but as the story progresses, we know this isn't true. Probably one of the most iconic scenes found in this game is the white phosphorus scene, which clearly shows the moral grayness in the story. Faced with what seems like an impossible tactical situation, Walker orders the use of white phosphorus, a weapon that burns through flesh and bone, which probably doesn't feel the greatest. I mean, I don't even like hot showers. The only justification for this is that Walker says it's the only way before firing the gas. The game offers no alternative way to continue. You're funneled into this decision like any other shooter, but once the smoke clears, you walk through the area seeing piles of burned civilians caught in the crossfire. And the worst part is the game doesn't even forgive you. It forces you to live in that moment. The horror isn't just something you witness, but it's also your doing. This is one of the many ways that Spec Ops deconstructs the idea of the player as the righteous hero. It reframes the soldier fantasy into a nightmare, confronting the moral bankruptcy of your actions and refusing to let you hide behind genre conventions. I think the thing that truly elevates Spec Ops: The Line is its psychological depth. From the first mission to the last, you are witnessing and participating in the mental collapse of Captain Walker. But what's so masterful is how the game slowly erodes your perception of reality, blurring the lines between truth and delusion. Throughout the game, the enemy changes from armed insurgents to looking like American soldiers, and Walker's voice grows angrier. The bright desert we saw in the beginning turns completely ash-covered, and the world around you begins to completely distort. It becomes increasingly unclear whether what you're seeing is real, or if it's a part of Walker's guilt and denial. The storytelling doesn't just affect the character, but it targets the player. The game begins with conventional military language like kill counts, objective markers, squad tactics, and so on. But as the game progresses, loading screens stop giving you tips and start giving you judgments. You are still a good person, or this is all your fault. It's not just Walker being blamed, it's you. I mean, you are the one who pushed forward, followed the orders, and kept shooting. And now the game asks you, can you really claim ignorance to what's happening? The narrative twists itself around your expectations. You begin to question not just Walker's sanity, but your own part in this journey. Unlike many games that reward curiosity and persistence, Spec Ops punishes you for it. The further you go, the worse it gets, and that's very intentional. The game manipulates you into thinking you have control, when in reality you never did. Violence in most shooters is designed to be satisfying. Whether it's that sound of getting a headshot, the thrill of perfectly throwing a grenade, or the chaos of getting a kill streak, these games offer power and reward through destruction. These games just desensitize you to these brutal actions without any further thought into what you're doing. Spec Ops: The Line refuses to play along. Here we see and think about how violence is unsettling. An example of this is when you have to choose between two different people to execute, but during the rest of the mission, your teammates continue to bring it up and how it was not the right thing to do. There is no triumphant fanfare, no glorification, and simply just the consequences. The longer you play, the more significant the choices are, and the more emotionally taxing your actions become. You're not mowing down random enemies anymore. You're killing soldiers who look like fellow Americans. Soldiers who are often just as confused as you are. Some shout in English, calling for surrender, while others plead for their lives. Yet the game rarely allows you to show mercy in situations. You are always forced to act, and the game records every trigger pull as another step into Walker's madness. This approach flips the shooter formula on its head. Instead of violence as entertainment, it shows you how morally wrong violence is. You're not some badass, you're more like a war criminal. And unlike other games that celebrate your kill count, Spec Ops wants you to feel every single one. Despite, or perhaps because of its unconventional approach, Spec Ops: The Line excels in several key areas. First and foremost is its narrative structure. Inspired by Apocalypse Now and Heart of Darkness, the game's story follows the classic arc of a descent into madness. But while those works focused on the horrors of imperialism, Spec Ops modernizes the tale to critique military interventionism and the genre that glorifies it. The pacing is very deliberate, and the tonal shift is very gradual. You don't notice when you cross the line, only that it's extremely far behind you. The game's thematic resonance is another strength. It explores trauma, nationalism, the dehumanizing effect of war, and most importantly, the illusion of moral clarity in conflict. It asks hard questions about culpability, obedience, and identity, not just for its characters, but for the player. Few games before or since have weaponized the interactive nature of the medium in such a confrontational way. Lastly, the art direction and environmental storytelling is quite remarkable. Dubai isn't just a backdrop, but it's a metaphor. The decaying grandeur of the city mirrors Walker's psychological deterioration. These luxury resorts are turned into morgues. Billboards are covered in blood, and sand pours through the marble hallways like time itself is bleeding out. The environment always reflects everything the narrative is doing thematically, and it does so without needing to explain itself aloud. That being said, Spec Ops is far from being a completely perfect game. The most common criticism, and perhaps the most justified, is its core gameplay. The shooting mechanics are functional but really unremarkable. The cover system can feel clunky, the enemy AI lacks variety, and by the halfway point, firefights begin to feel a little repetitive. This isn't a mechanically refined shooter like The Last of Us or Gears of War, but it's more of a delivery system for the narrative. Whether that was by design or budgetary constraint is still debated, but the result is a game where the mechanics often feel like they're just going through the motions. Another point of contention is the illusion of choice. One of the game's most disturbing moments, the white phosphorus scene, is non-optional. The player is forced to commit a war crime and then is made to feel guilty about it. While this is thematically consistent with the game's message, it has led some players to feel manipulated. The game critiques the illusion of agency, but in doing so, it denies the player the very moral struggle it claims to present. Finally, there is the marketing. The game was promoted like any typical shooter: explosive action, military jargon, and cool cover art. This led to a huge disconnect between expectation and reality. Many players came in wanting a traditional war story and left feeling deceived, unprepared for the game's psychological horror. That's not necessarily a flaw of the game itself, but it definitely impacted how the game was received. When the credits approach in Spec Ops: The Line, you're left with a final choice. Not a twist of fate or a sudden reveal, but a mirror. You learn that Conrad, the man you were supposedly chasing, has been dead for some time. Every interaction with him was a figment of Walker's psyche and a projection of his guilt. In the end, you're offered several choices: surrender, take your own life, hallucinate one last confrontation, or murder rescuers who come to extract you. Each ending reflects a version of Walker's psychological state: denial, guilt, madness, or delusion. None of these endings are really that satisfying, and none of them offer redemption. They're not there to tie up the story, they're there to remind you that the damage has been done. Spec Ops: The Line was also not a commercial success. It sold modestly, and Yeager never returned to the series. In fact, several developers involved have since stated they wouldn't make a game like this ever again. It was emotionally and creatively draining. But over time, the game has found its audience. Critics, scholars, and fans have since reevaluated it as a landmark moment in game storytelling. It challenged what a shooter could be. It turned the player into a participant in a narrative about guilt and delusion, and in doing so, it showed that games could critique their own genre, their own mechanics, and even the player holding the controller. It's been studied, dissected, and admired, not because it was fun, but because it wasn't. In conclusion, Spec Ops: The Line is a very rare kind of game. It's not only here to entertain you, it's here to implicate you. It's here to strip away your power, confront your expectations, and leave you with questions no other shooter dares to ask. In the end, it's not about whether you completed the mission, it's about what it cost you to keep playing. So ask yourself, do you feel like a hero yet?